I just want to set up this session by talking a bit about what service orientation is and what its relationship to SOA has been defined as. And that'll be nicely summarized here in this first slide, but it's very important that we make a distinction between service-oriented architecture as a technology architecture model and service orientation as the underlying method or paradigm that we apply to achieve the strategic goals that we've associated with service-oriented architecture. The other reason this distinction is so important is because, as many of you probably know, the acronym SOA has been, over the past decade, used in various ways to represent an entire industry, to represent lines of products, to represent an approach that in some cases has been vaguely defined or has been defined in conflicting manners and has led to the term service-oriented architecture to lose some of its meaning and significance over time, and therefore the resulting ambiguity has made some SOA projects less well-defined as they should be in order to be successful. That became a problem a few years ago. There was, at the height of that point of confusion, was the starting point for a series of discussions that I was involved with, which led to the formation of the SOA Manifesto Working Group, which resultingly led to the definition of a formal manifesto for SOA, during which this distinction between service orientation and SOA was made very clear. That was announced at the SOA and Cloud Symposium in Rotterdam in 2009. The SOA Manifesto announcement video was posted on YouTube and is still there, and if you're interested in looking at the SOA Manifesto, it's a very concise document, very effective communications piece that is located at soa-manifesto.org, and my annotated version is at the .com variation of that website. So just to summarize, we have a set of strategic goals, and these are goals. The word strategic there is of great importance, because when we approach SOA and when we consider it as a means of defining how we want our enterprise to be, there's a specific target state that we look to work toward, and that is strategic in that it's long-term. We have in mind an environment that we want to establish whereby there is intrinsic interoperability, there is increased reusability, and increased return on investment with every software program we deliver into that environment. And thereby, we look to foster this growing ecosystem of IT assets that are natively interoperable and that we can expect increased returns year after year after year. And therefore, longevity is a core part of realizing that environment. And in order for that environment to be a long-term investment that we can reap benefits from for a long period of time, it needs to be able to accommodate business change. So you'll hear me talk a bit about that shortly in an upcoming slide, about how being designed to support and respond to business change really lies at the core of service orientation as a paradigm and at the core of SOA as an architectural model. So these goals, as I mentioned, represent a target state, and that is what a lot of organizations have been focused on, is the goals. This is what we'll get by adopting SOA. And the biggest mistakes organizations made when they pursued that is not having a full understanding of what was required to achieve those goals. And that's where service orientation comes in. It provides the method formally defined for us to shape software programs in order to work toward the realization of those strategic goals. And that's why when we look at applying service orientation, a really good point of comparison is object-oriented design and analysis. For those of you who recall that from the 90s, that itself was a specific method. It had a specific set of principles, and it had techniques and a notation that was adopted by the industry, and it helped us formalize the method by which we wanted to attain a set of very specific goals. Service orientation is a very comparable approach, a very comparable paradigm. It was influenced by object-oriented principles, but it is distinct, and it is different, and it is a much more strategically oriented approach to how we design not just individual software programs, but how we design them in relation to each other. So when we, some terminology here, when we apply service orientation to a meaningful extent, we end up with units of service-oriented logic, which we can then legitimately refer to as services. And the environment we look to build is comprised of these services. Services do not need to be just brand new software programs we deliver for new automation solutions. Services can wrap and encapsulate legacy systems or other types of existing logic or resources we already have in our IT enterprise. The point is that we look to federate the API layer with all these services that are natively compatible and therefore interoperable, and therefore exist as individual units that we can aggregate into what we refer to as service compositions. And in order to accommodate business change over a long period of time, we need to be able to not just compose them, but recompose them, change the configuration of our compositions to accommodate whatever the change in business requirements or business processing requirements turns out to be. And there again lies the importance of being truly interoperable. That native level of interoperability is what allows us to have these flexible solutions that we can continually augment in response to change. So when we think about that service orientation as providing a set of design principles that allows to shape software programs in this manner, we look at SOA as a technology architecture model that needs to exist to support that. It's a distinct architectural model with distinct characteristics that are shaped by the application of service orientation upon the software programs that exist within and are defined by that technology architecture. The only thing we have to think about is that when we look at the scope of that target state we're building, that is the scope that the technology architecture spans. So it goes beyond individual systems and applications and represents a much larger part of the IT enterprise in order, again, to support that native interoperability. So that is the formal definition of SOA. And when discussing SOA, when planning for it and trying to understand it, that separation between architectural model and service orientation is of paramount importance. So SOA as a subject matter is something that there are different levels at which we can explore it. There are, very technical levels. There's the whole analysis dimension to SOA and service orientation and SOA adoption methodologies. There's the governance aspect, which is, of course, also very important to have in place right from the beginning through to the analysis and design stages, through to implementation and subsequent administration and so on. Governance needs to be there and is a strong component. But taking even a step backwards from that, one of the most significant considerations we have when adopting SOA is understanding what our organization needs to have in place as foundational areas of support or critical